rights. However, reserving the right to extend a dock for this property as well, possibly. So, we'll work out that language. I believe we discussed that with the city manager at some point.
And then between the staff report and your report, or maybe our conversation, is it 150 or 151 as the proposed capacity?
150.
150, okay. If I reserve, Mayor, if I can think of something else?
Okay, Commissioner McDonald?
Okay, thank you very much. Since we've got the screen up here, so in the initial application, you had the traffic coming in from Colorado exiting on the Seminole, but now what you're proposing is any traffic driving through would enter from Seminole and exit on Colorado. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
So would the garbage truck be entering the same way, or the garbage truck have to go the other way to
No,
get to?
the garbage truck would enter off of Colorado and turn into
Okay.
it. It's commonplace because it's so,
I,
it's.
yeah, but my question is, when
Yep.
there's a car parked on the other side of Colorado, will it still be able to make the turn in one of those parking spaces there? On the other, on the north, would be actually the west side of Colorado, because Colorado runs north and south, so
Yes, those turn radiuses do work,
they do work.
yes.
Okay, so yeah, right there, if there's cars parked there, the garbage truck will be
Yeah.
able to, okay, make it into the turn. Now, are you gonna have signage there so that, because one of the.
Correct, yes. There
So
would be
do not enter?
signage. Yes.
Okay, so
Yep.
you're gonna have the signage. There's a couple things, just a couple conditions, that if I were to vote for this, there would be a couple conditions I would need. One is an absolute condition of no valet. Because we've certainly heard from the neighbors on that. Also, regarding the parking, let's see, no valet, let's see what else here. Limiting the number of seats to 150. Limiting the square footage to, I think the proposed square footage of, was it 1,500?
I believe so, I'd have to refer.
Or whatever
to
the
actual
exact
data.
square footage
Right,
is.
yep.
But also that the covered area that's not part of the main structure, just the covered area, does not get enclosed. Because I've
You do
seen.
not want it enclosed.
Yeah, I've seen other restaurants come along, then later on, they come in and they enclose it, and now they've
What about
doubled.
for poor weather? Should we
Yeah.
define what?
I'm talking about a permanent straw, I'm not talking about,
Hold on.
drapes or,
Visqueen
yeah,
or,
like
yeah.
plastic covers. I'm talking about enclosing it with walls and windows.
Right, creating
Yeah,
under
and-
air,
Yeah.
under air.
In air, yeah, something under air.
Understood, I'm fine
Yeah,
with that.
so, also from, we'll have to talk about the music, but I think that if we were to allow live music, that we have a cutoff time of like 10 PM for the live music.
The standard noise ordinance,
So,
I believe, is
but,
10 AM, right?
10 PM,
10 PM, so.
Yeah, 10 PM.
or until 10 AM.
10 a.m. You'll keep it going all night. Let's see, max number of seats. What about hours of operation? Do you anything like limiting the hours to like midnight or? I
think it was
hate to
11.
try to keep away from, most of the restaurants closing downtown by midnight anyway, so. But I
Yeah,
think that way
I don't
keeps
see
that
this
nightclub
being a
atmosphere.
24-hour operation if
Yeah,
that's.
eliminates that nightclub atmosphere.
Yeah, I don't think so. We don't have an operator right now as of yet,
Okay.
but
It's
I would
11.
anticipate this would be an evening fine dining. There's no business after certain hours, you're not gonna keep staff on payroll, so.
Yeah, and then regarding the parking exempt, and we had talked about that quite a bit today when we spoke.
Yeah.
And after giving it a lot of thought, I think maintaining it within the PUD is fine, so, but it has to be a condition of the PUD. And I think, and tied to this use, this restaurant use. Then finally, a condition, and I think even a deed restriction limiting to 1 story. So those are just some of the conditions to let you guys chew on while the other commissioners are talking, but those are the things that I think I need to see as part of the conditions of the PUD. So,
I
thank you.
think we're okay with all of those with the exception of the deed restriction. The zoning agreement in this PUD's binding. I mean, you guys can shut us down. There's no need to restrict a deed for future. I believe that's an overreach respectfully. But certainly all the others, I don't have an issue with those.
Okay.
Sorry, and Nick Schroth, for the record, I believe it becomes a condition of the PUD in what we're presenting here, that under this PUD, the structure remain one story, but if it would, please the commission, we could add a specific condition that this PUD, by nature of the PUD, is restricting the height of the building to one story, and then anything, 100 years from now that needs to change that would, in theory, be an amendment to the PUD and not vesting any rights under, an interpretation that the downtown waterfront code allows 45 feet and 4 stories, and now we're trying to combine these two things to make a sandwich. And I might ask Lee or the city attorney or the city manager to comment further on how, what maybe you're exactly looking for there, Commissioner McDonald.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rich, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, one of the priorities that we have as the city is to maintain the public's access to the water. And that's not only the physical access, but it's the visual access. So as you walk down Colorado, and that's why this project is so appealing. As you point out, it's actually a cute little piece of property because of the grade and the cut back there. And it's nice that you take advantage of that. If people haven't walked there, it's nice and to access the boardwalk. Certainly, we're going to need that riparian right. That's of immense value to the city and to the public. The Commissioner McDonald made some good comments. The only thing I would add, and because parking is such a concern, is, and you originally agreed to provide 46 self-parking spaces, correct?
It was valet.
No, it was 46 self-parking and 70-something additional valet.
They were all valet.
Okay, but I would like to see you still have to lease those 46 spaces, but just make them available to the public. Just increasing the capacity of downtown parking. One of the things is we're trying to get people to be willing to walk 2 blocks, to drive a little bit towards Wells Fargo and park their car. There's plenty of parking there. And this operating as a public lot would be of terrific value. So you don't have to run valets, pay for valets, but I would still like you to see lease those and make them available to the public.
I understand the intent of what you're trying to do, and I do agree with it. However, respectfully, it's not appropriate for a private entity to go secure parking under lease, which we would then be liable for, to then give it to the city for public use. The appropriate thing is for you to instruct staff to say, go secure that parking under a lease agreement with the city. And you can go put signage up and say public, you can call it public parking, and you can lease it from those private entities. But it's not appropriate for us. We're not in that position to do that.
Do you have a comment on that? Lee, or?
I mean, that does expose them. We have sovereign immunity, which protects us. And maybe a happy medium was that they still lease the parking and make it available to their clientele,
Or pay the city the cost of the lease.
or that.
Okay. Well, this is the first hearing, so we can explore what options may be available there. Those are my only comments. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Commissioner Collins?
I would like to reserve mine until after public comment, if I could.
I guess we can.
Like to hear from the neighborhood.
All right,
Ca-
so,
Madam, before you go to
we
the
haven't made
neighborhood,
it.
can I ask, I think it might have been in here, if they had to provide those parking spaces, is it the 46 or is it more? If they had to provide actual parking? What was that number?
It was 46. They were going to provide 72.
Okay, so we tried to do double, okay. All right, fine, thank you. I just want to confirm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Collins is going to hold, and I will hold my comments also. So we will now hear from the public. We have many people here to speak tonight. So I'll start with Dennis Stillman. Mr. Stillman? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Dennis Spielman. My wife and I reside at 101 Southeast Seminole, property that has been in my family since 1939, and it has never been a service alley, despite what Mr. McCarty says. I really don't understand how this proposal can be considered when the requester has yet to state what sort of restaurant he is proposing. He states it will be high-end. But what does that mean? Does Stuart really need another high-end restaurant, especially after the loss of the Pelican and Mulligan's? Are we getting a high-end Mickey D's, another Waterfront, or a high-end Hooters? We don't know. Could we be reaching a point where the proliferation of restaurants will become a detriment to all? The 150 seats mentioned seems to be directly related to the requirements for obtaining the Four Cops SRX or SFX liquor license. This license requires 51% of revenue be derived from food sales. I find this extremely unlikely given the 50 by 150 foot size of the property. In fact, the provided artist sketch, which we were given at the meeting that was referenced, showed only 93 seats. Will this requirement be monitored and enforced? I understand that the requester has revised the plan to use the parking lot at 111 Osceola for valet parking. What alternative is he proposing? What assurances do we have that this issue will not be raised in the future? This does nothing to mitigate the increase in traffic along Seminole Street. Seminole Street is already a parking lot for existing restaurant staff, with no enforcement of the 3-hour limit. The requester is asking for the repeal of all ordinances in conflict with his plans. This is absurd. What does all mean? What are his plans? Will this repeal apply to current and future residents and businesses? Does it include the repeal of the noise ordinance? What does Stuart get for these considerations? What precedent are we setting? Each exemption must be enumerated and addressed individually. Ordinances are not capricious. Rather, they exist to protect the interests and well-being of the city residents, especially the ordinance requiring valet parking be within 500 foot. Put a note in his graphic where he said 600 foot. It's actually 750. 600 foot requires you go the wrong way down Denver. To repeal them collectively makes a mockery of the whole. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Luann Stillman?
I don't have anything to say right now, but could you come back to me if I need to?
If we need to. All right. I'll pick you last. How is that?
That'll be fine, thank you.
Okay. Chip Hazard?
Thank you. My name's Chip Hazard. I live at 57 Southeast Seminole Street. And I'm going to have a little hard time addressing all the issues that are brought up here, mainly because this application is not the same application that was approved by the other board, the Community Redevelopment Board. Now, they're saying they're not requesting valet and they're requesting parking exemptions. That opens up a whole big can of worms that I don't think it's fair to address in this amount of time, especially with only 3 minutes to speak. It was brought up about, addressing that issue case by case. You can't decide that tonight. It's just not fair. The public hasn't had enough notice. They haven't been advised. So I'm going to read my prepared remarks. I appreciate the difficulty of the position you place yourselves in. When applications like this one we are discussing, request special consideration and deviation from established zoning, you 5 commissioners are asked to vote yes or no on an application that's been presented to you and represented to the public. But that is not the application they're presenting tonight. You have to consider the applicant, but please remember, all of you, that you represent the residents of the city, not the city, the residents of the city. Southeast Seminole, again, is not an alleyway, it's a neighborhood. And you'll see that tonight because you have a lot of neighbors here. Most of the neighbors, there's over 30 residences there, and over 70 residents that I know are opposed to this project and have voiced that opposition. You need to consider us over the wishes of one applicant. The issues that everyone has presented, and I've even emailed every one of you, you know what they are. Their traffic, their safety, and their quality of life. Those issues are really the utmost importance to everyone who has chosen to live here on Southeast Seminole and become a resident of Stuart. So I ask you, and I anticipate that you will, you'll weigh out our concerns and our opinions because we're residents and taxpayers, and not just weigh out the considerations and of the applicant. You have a development in front of you. He has a right to request this development, but you have an obligation to consider us, the residents. Now, I take exception to a lot of the way this was presented. In particular, the applicant told you that there was overwhelming consensus that the residents were only considered with valet. That may be his opinion, but that is not the fact. He's assuming that's the opinion because there were so many issues raised we couldn't address them all, just like we can't address them all now. It was brought up at this meeting just earlier tonight about educating the public about zoning and land use. But what use is that if you're gonna sit here and exempt and just disregard all of that zoning to satisfy a developer?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Marty Belinkie? Marty? Mr. Belinkie? Another last, everyone's waiting. Mr. Ed Lucindy?
Madam Mayor and Commissioners, I've met with most of you, and I have expressed my concern for valet parking. And in those meetings, we talked about the possibility of some form of parking exemption for this property, given the fact that it was within a reasonable distance of where the current boundary was. Since that time, I've tried to find examples of where parking exemptions have been given outside of the old district zone. I found none. I also looked at what were some of the activities in the past that allowed you to move that boundary. I found none. I asked about the movement of the boundary and how it would take place, and the best I could determine was it would be moved from the center line of Seminole Street to the properties that are across the street from where the boundary currently exists. In other words, all of the riverfront property would be exempted from parking. There are 3 empty lots on that street. That means that if a precedent is set, why wouldn't they be entitled to have a parking exemption? They'd be within the boundary of the zone. All I ask is make sure that there is a legal boundary for us, that we're protected from future use of that land for a restaurant, and that if you do give the exemption to this 101 Colorado Avenue, that exemption is not given to anybody else in the Seminole Street area. We don't need a restaurant. We can tolerate a restaurant, at least I can tolerate it, but I am not going to support it if there is any possibility to be more than just that one restaurant, because that makes it 7 in 2 blocks. Are we going to have 8, 9, 10? We might as well call it Seminole Street, Bourbon Street, because that's what it'll be like. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bruce Laraway?
I just think for clarity, not to get into, responding to each comment, but just for clarity, what is being proposed is parking exemption for this particular parcel versus those additional,
Mr. Laraway?
just to help bring clarity.
Bruce? Didn't hear you, Becky.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. I live on Semel Street. I've lived there about 15 years. I drove down that street to try and find a house for 15 years. And there wasn't any. Finally, the woman put a sign in there front and I bought it. I like it there. We've tore down our house, we've torn down the other house, and we've built a beautiful home. And I gotta tell you, one thing that really, really grabs me is these people, so far they've called it an alley. And some of the people you heard just now, they have multi-million-dollar houses there. Every night I go out and I walk my dog, and there's, you see more people all the time coming out at night, which is fine. But how long are they gonna do that? And how are they gonna get around there, or they turn it into a racetrack? And somebody's gonna get killed. So I live there, I love it there. You heard my neighbors, and you heard my friends. And it's just, it doesn't need to be whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Campani, come.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
When we approved it at the CRB, it was a bit different. But I can understand why they don't want the valet. Makes sense. But those spaces, those parking spaces, if the deal could be worked out, as Lee and Mike has said that, they will become for the employees, not only of that restaurant, but of others. Because currently, they do take up parking spaces that would generally go to the public eating downtown. So I think that's very important that you keep that and give them the parking exemption, but they need to provide the other 42. And if you can work out a deal, as Mike and Lee believe you can, for liability, I think that's a perfect solution. As to the music, I added that condition. I know what it's like to not be able to sit on my back porch on a Friday and Saturday night because of music. I'm on the water, and on the water, music travels. And so I haven't been able to use my back porch on a Friday or Saturday night in years. And you have people who now live on Seminole, and they're gonna experience the same problem. Because I gotta tell you, there is no enforcement of the noise ordinance. It's all make-believe. And I'm not the only one, I'm sure my friend Kurt could speak to that. So I am saying that this is a great project because we don't need any more residential on Seminole for that space. But I think you need to bring in a few protections for the people that live there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mark Bricknell?
Mark Breckbill, and I'm a resident in that area, down at 208 Southeast Osceola Street. I was also the no vote on the CRB relative to this project. And the reason I voted against it was that there is no parking. And I know we don't have a parking problem in Stuart, and we don't need, you know, everything's fine. But, but the fact of the matter is, the way it was being proposed was ludicrous. The alternative, after the meeting they had with the neighborhood, which was good, is a better alternative, but it's still an issue. It's still a problem that we're putting another thing right there that's going to generate a lot of traffic. So I think if you're going to do this, you need to do it within what the existing plan was downtown. I mean, the easiest way to do this is to move it in under the downtown exempt parking, because it's right next to it, but at the same time, put it in the saturation district. Because that's the reason we have that saturation district, is to avoid something like this becoming a bar. So I understand the neighbors, and I have a concern too, and I would have more of a concern if that's a bar and people are coming out of there drunk and stumbling down my street. And, you know, when you look at it, you know, that should be within our saturation district, and it should be such that right now, there is no room for that kind of liquor license in the city of Stuart. So, anyway, that's my take.
Yes, thank you, sir. Ms. Lorianne Stillman, your turn. Come on.
See, yeah, they're not hearing you, Becky.
Good evening.
I wasn't planning on speaking, and I'm very nervous, even though I'm a retired teacher. I'm used to speaking, but I had to say something. Several people already brought up being referred to tonight as Seminole Street being an alley. I resent that. And I mentioned at the last meeting we met with the developer, he called us the forgotten stepchild of Stuart. Our street is beautiful. We've put millions of dollars, if you add us all together, to rehab our houses. We have a lovely, friendly neighborhood. I hope you're not thinking of this restaurant as the saving grace it's being presented to you that's going to beautify our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is beautiful. We do not need a saving grace. All it's going to do is bring lots of traffic. The last speaker just mentioned hopefully not becoming a bar. Every weekend, we see drunks parked right across from our street. I'm at 101 Southeast Seminole. Last week, we saw a man so drunk, he called an Uber and stumbled into the Uber. Thank gosh, he did not drive. But that is our concern also. Traffic is bad now. This is going to be so much worse. But please don't approve it thinking we need a beautiful restaurant to save our neighborhood. It is not an alley. It is not the forgotten stepchild, as it has been referred to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Ernest, I don't have your address. You can come forward, but twice you've left off your address. Could you give me your address?
I want you to know where I live.
May I have it, sir?
Johnson Avenue, 801 Johnson Avenue.
Okay, good enough.
I got better.
Is that where the post office is?
Yes, that's where I pick up my mail. Greetings, small-town Stuart commissioners. Small town, I emphasize. You know, it makes me sick to drive down Seminole Street. I see these beautiful little houses there. The history of Stuart. What we had in Stuart. Where was Mr. McCarthy when you approved Sailfish Cove? That makes me sick to see that sitting on Seminole Street. Where was Mr. McCarthy when you approved River House? That makes me sick to see that. Those beautiful little homes. These poor people. Seminole Street's been abused by you people. You voted to destroy Seminole Street. I wish there's some way we could take it back. Parking, let's just talk about parking for a minute. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here thinking, you people approved Creekside and you're talking about this? That's an oxymoron. My wife and I loved to come downtown and go to T.A. Burns. What was that, a decade ago? T.A. Burns. You don't know where it was? It was downtown.
It's where
They had-
Maria's was.
They had a wood-fired pizza oven. We loved to go there. It was owned by Mike. I told Mike, I go around the block one time, no parking space, I'll go to Flanagan's, I'll go to Carson's, I'll go where there are parking spaces. And there are many times we didn't go to T.A. Burns because there was no parking, because you've overdeveloped the city. You voted to overdevelop the city. And I've asked Mr. McCarthy if he'd go talk to the developer of Creekside and come in with a plan like this, a boutique motel of 2 stories at Creekside. You didn't need to approve what he proposed. You rubber stamp what the developers want. You don't need to do that. You could have said, go see Mr. McCarthy and he will give something that belongs in Stuart. This same park, you're taking parking away from Kara at Fruits and Roots. You're taking parking away from Jen. I eat there. I go there twice a week. They have wonderful food. But I told Jen and Kara today, I will not come there if I don't have a parking space.
Sir?
And you approving Creekside took
Sir?
that parking away.
Sir?
I can't believe what you're doing tonight talking about
You
this.
you are speaking of the wrong one, and then you know it.
I'm speaking what?
Which number were you speaking for?
He's
Number
talking
7?
about, he's talking about last meeting.
Yeah, you already spoke about this twice, and you were supposed to speak about number 7 on our agenda.
I did just talk about that. I've talked about how you destroyed Seminole Street.
Thank you, sir.
And get Mr. McCarthy to do some good designing for you before you rubber stamp these developers. They ruined this place. Thanks for what you said, appreciate it.
Jim Spurgeon, please come forward. Mr. Spurgeon. Thank you, sir.
Jim Spurgeon. I live at 47 Southwest Osceola Street, apartment 301. It's a beautiful condo that straddles Osceola Street and Seminole too. So I got a really pretty place and have watched a lot of things happen in our area. The main reason I wanted to speak is that when I saw that there was the applicant had given you the notice that he'd sent out notices to people within 300 feet. I believe I'm within that circle, and I never have gotten a notice on this, and I would have liked to have gone to the November meeting and the December meeting as well. But anyway, I just wanted to go on record saying we didn't receive notice. I generally think that the traffic situation that we see, I see the Wild West out there every day of people trying to find parking places. Another 150 persons or seat restaurant is going to mean that much more difficulty in finding parking. And what happens to us on Seminole Street is the traffic pattern of delivery trucks use that, and I see just another delivery trucks coming down there. We have our one balcony bolstered up right now from delivery trucks hitting the building, and I think really if we find a better solution for parking rather than exempting it, that would be good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sean Reed. Welcome, Mr. Reed.
Good evening. My name's Sean Reed, for the record. I believe most people support the concept of it. Obviously, the residents have spoken. The biggest issue in this city is traffic. I did read the traffic analysis, and according to it, there's 390 more daily trips that are going to be added to it. I believe the densities would be much higher doing this than, maybe the 4 stories that they suggested, because then they would have to meet zoning codes and building codes. They wouldn't have to come in front of the commission asking for a parking variance. Also, as far as the seating, like Tom said, I don't believe anybody enforces that, because there are other projects in the city where after getting a CO, they have added more seats. It hasn't been enforced by anybody. I don't think it gets enforced at all. And as far as the valet, there was 46 self-parking spaces if people self-parked at that project. But if they valeted, it would have been 72 if everything was perfect. And I also noticed there were 6 letters in support of the project that were sent to Jody Kugler, our development director. Most of them were very generic. They were the same 6 letters, just rinse and repeat. As far as I'm concerned, we live in the city of Stuart. We're supposed to be unique. We're supposed to be different. And I believe the way the commission has voted over the last several years, there's nothing unique about us at all. Everything has been approved multiple times. It's like, when do we say enough is enough and stand up for the residents? We vote for the commission at the end of the day. And these developers come in here and ask for whatever they want, and it seems they get it. Thank you. Have a good night.
Mr. Belenky, Marty?
Good evening, Mayor Brunner. Good evening, City Commissioners. Good morning, Good evening, Attorney Mortel and Mr. Baggett. I'm Marty Blicky. I've lived here since 1960. Coach, yeah, I came back from college. I graduated from Warren County, by the way, in 1973. And I became a teacher, later a dean of students, and a volleyball coach. And yes, I am in the Hall of Fame.
Oh.
Before I try to talk to you, speak to you, you're the better angels, I just want to acknowledge my wife and all the people that came out to support Seminole Street. Thank you so much. Thank you. We oppose this restaurant. It's a nice idea, it looks really nice, but there's a lot of problems. Already, they've 4 variances they want to amend and change, and you know, when you start bending the rules, you start making more problems. Just last night, look at it. The guy kicked that ball in the center of the field goal, and it just bent. I tell you what, you don't want to bend rules. My mother came here in 1972. I mean, she moved to Seminole in 1972 because we live at 42 Southeast Seminole. And she loved the ambiance of the road. The neighborhood has been around for over 130 years. Just 4 doors from her was Ernest Lyons. Now, that house was built in 1891 when that area was called Potsdam. You were thinking about damn pots, weren't you? But anyway, he would be livid about having a restaurant there within 120 feet of his house. Now, the guy, Ernie, I knew Ernie, and he would be opposed to this idea. And he wrote a book called The Last Cracker Barrel. And in that book, he called this area paradise. It is paradise. Stuart is a great place. This restaurant, though, is not needed. The people on Seminole do not want it. We went out and did a petition ourselves, my wife and I. We had over nearly 100 names of people who said no to this idea. Now, we did have 2 people who were neutral. They were Mormons down at the Flagler Park. They didn't want to be committed. My wife and I inherited the house in 2020, put a lot of money into it, made it into an historic home, kept the history of the whole area. Come by and see it, 42 Southeast Seminole. It's a beautiful home, and I thank my wife for all the hard work that she helped put into it. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. McBride, Helen, Ms. McBride. After Ms. McBride is Annie McMillan.
Helen McBride. I don't live in the area. I live on Flamingo Avenue. But there's a few things that have been said here that are wrong. First of all, Tom Campetti, I don't want this on record, but he's 100% right. My grandson made me.
I agree with you on the not wanting that on the record.
My grandson's a train, well, he loves trains and that, and he was staying with me, and he said, Grandma, can we go down to the bridge to watch the bridge go up and see the trains? And it was Saturday night at like 9:45, and we came down. And let me tell you, I tell everybody, I couldn't believe I was in downtown Stuart. The noise, from music, you're just bombarded because you're by the water, and the sound was really something else. So no, there should be no music. Secondly, there is one handicap parking spot. It's a city it's on the city street in front of the home. There's more than one handicapped person in Stuart. Let me tell you, it's very hard to find handicap parking. We've gotten old. And secondly, I apologize because the people that are saying the alley. I've lived here 50 years, and I do love talking to senior citizens, the people who've been here long before I was. When you come down Colorado, you take a right, you're on Seminole Street with the beautiful homes. If you take a left, that's our business district. And it was an alleyway for the businesses. That's where the deliveries were made, the garbage was picked up. And that, back in the old days, before all these young people moved there, or bought home, inherit their homes, that's the confusion. If you take the right, you're on Seminole Street. If you take the left, it was the alleyway. And then people started, they made it a road. It's like a lot of our alleyways. But anyway, I personally, am with the neighbors. It'd be like if Commissioner Collins wanted to put a restaurant on my street. Let me tell you, I'd have my neighbors here, just like all these neighbors are here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. McMillan?
Hi there, Annie McMillan, and I'm here to support Save Our Seminole Street neighbors. I'm here to support them. But more than that, I was here on the 8th. I'd like to tell you that I continue to stand up high here, I guess. I continue to stand by my words on January the 8th, that we, meaning the taxpayers, the voters, and the residents, need to, number one, clearly understand what is currently allowable in our compact downtown area. We need to understand that. Number two, an opportunity to voice, as we're doing tonight again, our opinions on what is disruptive and troubling. We're doing that. And number three, to be given an explanation of what can be changed in our codes and regulations if necessary, and how that can be accomplished. Three things. I think the time is now for several presentations by our city staff and listening sessions to hear from the public for the 3 points listed above. This would help calm the waters and add clarity to future conversations on development proposals. And once again, my offer still stands to assist you in whatever way I can help to make this happen. Thank you again for understanding this current situation and your ongoing willingness to make our downtown a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all of the people. Is anyone else? Okay, no more. I will say, would you like to say a few more words?
I'd like the opportunity to respond to some of the comments, if I may, as representative of the applicant. Mike McCarty and Associates, Land Planning, appreciate it. I have a couple things here I'd like to address. There's some inaccuracies and some statements of false claims. A lot of these residents, when they say their address and where they're located, they purchased within a CRA, a community redevelopment area, and a mixed-use CRA for that matter. And there are a plethora of uses that are allowed throughout the CRA and the urban waterfront and the surrounding area. And I know that, and I understand where they're coming from, that they've lived here forever, they've lived here 10 years, maybe they've only lived here 2 years, the Seminole Bluff the River House, it's just CO'd in the last couple of years. And it's like, once you get here and you should shut the pearly gates and everything should just stop, right? Well, let's rewind. Let's think about what Stuart was 20, 30 years ago, okay? Because Stuart was in a bad place 20, 30 years
Mike,
ago.
I would say focus on your project and not
I am.
dismissing them.
I am. No, this is part of my project. Thank you. And so if it wasn't for revitalization and rehab and urban infill and reuse, City of Stuart wouldn't be vibrant like it is today, that has attracted all these people to move here. So as far as the exemption boundary, there was a statement made about adjusting an exemption boundary. We're not proposing to adjust any exemption boundary through this PUD. What is of discussion tonight regarding exemption is only for this piece of property. So I just want to clear the air there. As far as, I use the reference of an alley. The alley, I understand, extends, from Colorado all the way back up around Seminole Bluff and around the boathouse. I apologize if that's offensive. I'm not trying to offend anybody by referencing it as an alley. It's just a matter of fact of what it is. As far as a parking lease, we really can't go secure a parking lease on another person's private property and then be the middleman and go give it to the city. I'm happy to introduce whoever wants to represent the city and take you to meet the individuals that have these parking lots that are available. As far as a lease, if you'd like to lease those, I'd be happy to make that transaction happen for you. Saturation district, we're not in the saturation district. This is a standalone PUD. Anyway, I think I've covered most of the issues at hand, but we're here to request approval. If you have any additional questions, I'm here to answer them. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make? And I'd like to also reserve the right for our client to also speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Schroeth for the record. There's just a couple things I wanted to clear up. So we brought this forward, and I think Dr. Shamek and I originally discussed this property in 2020, early 2021. And we approached the city probably in an oversimplistic, utopian sort of concept, like, hey, 18 Seminole across the street's not got a bunch of parking on it. Can we be a restaurant here and not have parking? And, things are more complicated than that. So we got into the code and the extension of the parking exemption district and like Mr. Lucente came up and said, well, now does that include all of Seminole? And is like, if you're going to include this one, do we just include the next one and the next one and the next one? And so, that got nixed and we had to provide a justification for not having the parking, and so the valet concept came in, and we approached Dr. Levine, who owns the property down the road, and we thought, all right, great, here's a big parking lot, and it can be easily accessed by valet, and come to find out, and rightfully so, and talking to some of the residents and hearing from them, it's not exactly easy, and it's not exactly a good thing for them, and so. One of the things that was discussed at our community meeting, and I felt personally like there was support for a restaurant in this location, just a big no-no on the valet parking. But there was also opposition to that parking lot being used for parking at night. And so, my hesitation in entertaining this concept that we would somehow go out and broker a deal for the city to turn that into parking as part of our condition is sort of in defense of these folks here who don't want that, and at least express to me that they don't want it. And maybe they can show by raise of hands who wants that parking lot to be used for parking for the city. I don't think they would support that. At least that's the feedback we got at the community meeting. The intent here is not to turn this into a bar. The intent here is not to, you know, blare loud music all night. I think we would be, and this, the ultimate decision rests with Dr. Schambach, but I think a condition that prohibited amplified music after a certain time or at all, I think would be considered. I think a an exemption that prohibited, you know, even live music of any type, I think would be, you know, something that could be considered. This isn't intended to be a rough and rowdy place, and I would expect nothing less than this commission to, you know, try to place conditions on this project that will prevent that. So I think that was those were the only things. The saturation district, you know, if this conversation spills into extension of the saturation district, if it turns into extension of the parking exempt district, you know, I do ask that y'all recognize we've been at this for 2 years, and, you know, the PUD kind of encompasses those things, but for this specific property, without opening this up into a Pandora's box of, well, if we're gonna include them, you know, I wanna be included, or they wanna be included, or do we include the next one? So I do ask that this conversation, you know, kind of focus on this, you know, little bitty project, and this little bitty house that we'd like to turn into a little bitty place that we can all go. And, you know, if that's not the commission's will, then that's not the commission's will, and we'll find another use for the property. But it'll look a lot different, it'll look a lot bigger, and it'll be a lot more concrete. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll go before,
Madam, oh, you're gonna go?
Yes.
I was just going,
I'll go after
I was just
Commissioner
going to express how I felt about the property. I can't vote for this piece of property. It's like overkill for me. People have spent millions and millions of dollars in restaurants around there. I mean, millions. And we're getting to where we are going to have parking problems. So I can't vote for it because of parking. Commissioner?
So I had just really a question around that parking lot. I really liked Commissioner Rich's idea of having that parking still be available for patrons. I think the main issue, if I'm gathering that, is the fear of valet drivers zipping back and forth down that street and somebody getting hurt. What was the arrangement that you guys were planning on having with Levine? Were you planning on leasing those spots?
Yeah, we were planning on entering into a nighttime lease agreement so that, you know, we had parking secured when he was not using it. You know, and that is specific.
I've seen you kind of like shaking your head. Why would you be opposed to that idea of having those spots be available for the restaurants' patrons versus
Like
just
all
having?
of downtown?
No, for those
For just our patrons?
Yes.
I don't know that, you know, when we come downtown, or when I come downtown, you know, I live in the city, come downtown to eat often, you know, we kind of park where we park and then eat where we go to eat. And I don't know that that part of downtown has that kind of connection to downtown. So I don't think that the average customer for this restaurant is going to find that parking spot, you know, down the road.
With some signage up front that, you know, was associated with that restaurant, maybe.
I mean, you know, again, it goes back.
Just the thought of like no parking requirement, wide open, go find a spot is
Listen,
that's tense, man.
I get it, and, you know, I think that, you know,
So trying to find a solution
what
that
we're-
everybody can.
After our community meeting, I would not want to tie us, you know, somehow using that parking lot to this project simply because of, you know, what we told these folks and the damage that I think would come to their way of life. Now, that, aside from the, you know, transactionally trying to figure out how we go to Dr. Levine and say, hey, by the way, like, we were going to have a controlled situation with the valet company that we hired that has their own insurance, that is their own thing, and now Billy, regardless of how many drinks he has before he gets to us, is gonna park in this parking lot, and it's just open to everybody that comes. And so,
But you could see how that same liability sort of extended out for the city to carry because of your restaurant is a similar kind of an issue.
yeah, I mean, I understand, you know, it's the same liability that you've got on every other, you know, downtown restaurant. And what we are doing is asking to, you know, be another restaurant in downtown. And so at the core of this request is, you know, is there a demand for another restaurant downtown? And my feeling is yes. And when you look at, you know, the restaurants that we have downtown and you know, the success that they've had, you know, we feel like there's room for another restaurant. When you look at the waterfront restaurants that we have downtown, you know, there's not, we're kind of in a unique spot where there's not a ton of waterfront, you know, like our downtown doesn't front the waterfront. And so when you look at the success of Boathouse, you know, we're kind of here wanting to, you know, replicate that. You know, Boathouse doesn't have any parking on it. I don't know how their dumpster works. Ours is much bigger. You know, it's a request, and if we're gonna have to provide that additional parking, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation that, you know, we've gotta go have, and I don't know that, you know, putting myself in Dr. Levine's shoes, I don't know that has the same response as, hey, you know, we're gonna have a fairly controlled, you know, situation here.
I think it would
Again,
be
I'd
something
also,
good to bring forward to, you know, second reading. I think that's having that conversation so we could all chew on it.
yeah, I mean, we'll take note of it.
So my other thoughts, and you're good to go, Nick. I love the idea of that boardwalk extending. My question was, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, we're exempt from franchises there, correct? Right? I love that stays single story. I love that the public would have access there versus otherwise not, you know, being able to enjoy that waterfront. I think that's great. I do also like the idea, which I know you guys aren't going to want to hear, but the deed restriction. I would love to limit that to what it is if we're going to approve it, even though I know we're doing that with the PUD. I love that idea. I'm with Tom on no music. I think you have a residential neighborhood right there. If you're going to have that restaurant, it needs to be quiet. Because I know you may disagree. I'm just giving you my thoughts. But I would hate to have spent all that money on a place to live and be on the water, and then all of a sudden this thing pops up that wasn't there before, no matter what the acceptable use is in that area. Just and lastly, you know, I was hoping we could come into this meeting, and I was really hopeful with the valet being removed that the neighborhood would be more optimistic towards this, but it still seems like there's issue here. So for me, right now with the way this is sitting, I don't feel comfortable supporting this, so I'm going to be a no. I mean, we'll see where this goes from here, but yeah, I'll stop with that.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I'm going to have three things. I hope I can remember them. When you mentioned about the unique one of a kind, so we have the whole historic district where the businesses had to be a certain way, and of course we have Duffy's, that's a chain, but there's a way that was approved. Now, if we had just either one of a kind of a chain, or does it have to be an absolute, it's only thing? I know when we had the clothing store that was part of a chain and we had to go through a special hearing to hear that. You don't know who you're gonna get yet, but is it for sure that if we did have this in that district, that would be a part of the PUD, that it has to be a one-of-a-kind type restaurant? So that when they try to go out and get somebody, they don't get, tell me a restaurant. Chili's.
Bob likes Flanagan's.
Okay, Flanagan's. They don't get another Flanagan's?
Commissioner Clark, that would be up to the board. I would have to check the boundaries of where that,
The only restriction is that it's in the formula retail area.
Yes, that's what I was-
So if
that's
it's
the
in
word.
formula
Yes.
retail, the commission would have to approve it based upon the conditions set forth for the approval of a formula retail business in that district.
Thank you for that term, Mike.
So it is not in the for,
It is in the
is.
restricted.
Restricted.
There's a prohibition on any
yes, that's.
formula
forgive me,
retail
yes.
within that district.
Five.
Six or more.
6 or more, yeah, that's
Right.
what it is. And
Yeah.
we've approved them in downtown. There's a couple there now, Monkeys. is one.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Duffy's.
Duffy's was there before that. And, but they have to come in and do an application and go through a hearing in order to get approved.
And the goldfish.
There-
I remember when we had to do goldfish.
Right.
There is
Alden
not a
store.
single restaurant in downtown Stuart that was here in the 90s.
Okay,
Every single restaurant's changed.
okay. With regard to a PUD,
Maria's was on East Ocean Boulevard, and it was T.A. Vern's.
Yeah.
thank you, thank you. With regard to the PUD and what's the difference between the conditions in a PUD and the type of resolutions that control some of the different developments along Seminole that has happened. We've had some parcels on there that have been given the parking exempt through resolution. Is it a tighter and a more better fix to have it through a PUD versus a resolution?
Commissioner Clark, the PUD does give you, it rezones the property to that urban, to the PUD requirements. Essentially, right now, we have a major urban conditional use or a urban planned development. It's depending on what type of intensity and density that the project's looking for. In this case, they chose a urban planned unit development. Selfish Cove was an urban planned unit development. They had some relief on some parking. It's really the will of the applicant. I feel it's more appropriate through a planned development as through a conditional use. You have an ordinance as opposed to a resolution. You have three public hearings as opposed to 2.
Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, this is going to be my last question. I've talked to you before, Ms. Kugler, on this. I don't know if you prepared any backup information, and maybe between you and Mr. Mortel and Mr. Baggett, you can kind of parse this out to the public. But to explain to the public with regard to the parking exempt and the saturation level and where we are now and what happens when somebody comes in, and are both things tied together, the parking exempt and the saturation level?
Yes, Commissioner Clark. So the exemption area was dedicated as the historic district. The few parking spaces that were added, and then in 2007, the Colorado N came in, and we expanded the district once again. At that time, this particular property was not added to the district. The saturation district.
Were they asked to be added to the district when the Colorado Inn was coming in at the time?
At one point in time, this particular property was requested to come in. They exempt themselves out because it wasn't a need at the time.
They were still a single family.
They had went through an urban conditional use to allow the office space, that's the 252 square feet that you see today. That was in the early 90s. At that time, I do believe they were approached to come into the parking exemption district. At that time, I don't think there was a need. The saturation district overlay is essentially the same as the parking exemption, except for the properties on the north side of the property. We negotiated with the Fine Inland Navigation to build the boardwalk along there, so we did not add that square footage to the saturation district. So right now, the saturation district only allows up to 30% of the alcoholic beverages license to be issued, and we are at that maximum today.
So even if they get a parking exempt, they wouldn't benefit from the saturation level, saturation district level?
No, they would not benefit at this time, unless we brought in other properties.
Or if they didn't serve alcohol.
Correct,
Right.
correct.
Just for clarity.
I think it's restaurant space, right?
Restaurant space, yes, restaurant with serving,
It's tied to the business use.
Well, there's an exemption for, I think, under 50 seats or something like that, or there's a cafe exception as well.
Okay.
The square footage.
Just to address a couple of things, I don't think a deed restriction is something, we're prepared tonight to entertain. I think that's a pretty big deal. The zoning, conditions, those live with the property, we gotta come back here to ask, permission to change those. Deed restrictions are bought out, and, that becomes a fairly heavy, question mark down the road when, Pandora's box opens back up. I don't think that's on the table. The noise, certainly understand it, real problem, real, solutions can be found. I think no noise, and maybe Mr. Kimpenny can, elaborate on what his intention was, but I think you're hard pressed to walk into any restaurant that has zero music, and so, finding a happy median, presenting the development director with a noise study of our final, speaker layout with our building plans, that might allow for enough music to keep guests, stimulated, if you will, or entertained or whatnot without spilling over the property. We did do a restaurant down in the Keys where we worked with a sound study guy, and, we were able to, demonstrate how, the proposed use, would remain on the site. So if that were to be a condition of the approval, that, that gets submitted with building plans where we're showing speaker layouts, that might be a way to address that. So if, Mike, Dr. Schoenbeck, do you guys have anything to add?
If you have any further questions, we're here at your mercy. We've put 2 years into this. It's appropriate to have a restaurant in downtown. I understand the concerns regarding the noise. I think we can work through that between now and second reading, find something that's palatable for everyone. We've tried to address all the concerns of the residents. I'm not sure else what's to offer at this point. So one-story restaurant, in keeping with our small downtown. It's a boutique restaurant. It provides a public benefit, public access to the waterfront, extension of the boardwalk, et cetera. I guess the other alternative, my client will move forward in other direction.
You've
But,
done quite well,
I
Mike.
appreciate your time and your consideration. We'd like the option to try to move forward if we could.
Yeah.
If we can garnish your support, if not, we'd like the option to continue and try to work some elements out if we could.
May I ask a question, Madam Mayor?
Yes, Commissioner.
Mr. Baggett, let's say that if there's no motion or if the motion isn't seconded, what is there, they can come back without prejudice as soon as possible with a new plan?
Well, this is the first reading.
This is
We-
first
we're
reading,
coming
I
back
understand.
for the second reading, is when you guys will actually vote on it.
Yeah.
There could be changes by then, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, or maybe we can ask.
I'd like to ask, are we ready for a vote?
Madam Mayor, he asked me what I meant by my statement, and I'll be glad to.
We'll allow it.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, if this was an inside restaurant, indoor, then the music would be contained indoor. When you have a restaurant and everything is outdoor, that music is gonna travel. And no matter what you do, especially since it's on the water, it's gonna travel. And I have nothing against music, but I know what's gonna happen. The police are gonna be inundated with complaints. The police are gonna have to try to respond. It's impossible to respond to a noise complaint. And so you're setting yourselves up to have a battle between this restaurant and those people living on Seminole. And I don't think that's the whole point of this. So that's what I meant. If it was indoors, I would have no problem, and I wouldn't have made that condition.
stand corrected. If there's not a motion to approve, then, we'd like to respectfully table this item and, bring it back after, further deliberation amongst our team and, coordination with the neighbors and,
You can always request that after the hearing.
Okay.
Thank you. And I also want to thank all the citizens on Seminole Street for coming tonight and the hours you've sat here and all your letters and your concerns. We heard them. Are we going to try again? Do we have a motion? I guess we don't.
It's a first hearing.
Okay. Well, I guess.
So it'll be set for another hearing without a
Start
vote?
over.
Yeah, this will be set for a second reading. This is the first reading. So it'll come back for a second reading and then you vote.
First meeting in February.
All right, we're
So,
adjourned.
just
No?
so that I understand the procedural here, so we're saying that the first reading was a no vote, and then this is gonna come back for a second reading, and that vote is gonna carry the day?
The first reading vote doesn't actually have any bearing on the
That just tells
ordinance
people
anyway.
what's
It's
coming in the
indicative
second.
of the support or
Okay.
lack of support of the board.
'Cause we
The
can
fact
change
that
our
it didn't get a
minds.
motion doesn't stop the due process of the two-hearing process to the applicant. So the applicant's free to return on whatever date in February the hearing is, I think it's February 12th, and pursue a vote or pursue a conclusion, or between now and February 12th, the applicant could request a continuance, or the applicant could request, could withdraw the application, or make adjustments to the application accordingly.
So do we need to request a continuance to a date certain, or it's just second reading is scheduled for
If it's-
February and?
Second reading is currently scheduled. If it requests a continuance between, let's say tomorrow you called and said to request it on February 12th, the board would have to request, or would have to have a motion to schedule it for a date certain of whenever that is, and it would be moved to the date certain on February 12th.
Okay.
Okay. This meeting is adjourned.
We're gonna take a break before we do our